Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Chimera Station. This is a 2 to 4 player worker placement, tile placement science fiction game where you take the role of factions in the commerce hub of Chimera Station. You'll be gathering resources, building modules, splicing your workers, and taking command over the station, trying to become the greatest faction. How do you become the greatest faction and win the game? By having the most prestige points at the end of 5 rounds. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components setup and how gameplay works in Chimera Station. Now let's take a look at the components. You have the main game board, round marker, start player tile, locked command hub tile, double-sided player boards. If it's your first time playing the game, it's suggested that you use side A. Side B has faction powers. Starting resources cards, social victory cards, score markers for each faction, additional score markers for each faction that allow you to go over 100 points and 200. Research markers, 6 workers in the 4 different faction colors, 4 types of genetic components, your tentacles, brains, leaves, and claws, food tokens, station module tiles, perk cards, coins, and then finally your rulebook. Now let's take a look at the setup. We're going to be setting this up for a 2-player game, which takes 14 steps. Step 1, place the main board in the center of the play area. Step 2, place the lock token on slot B of the command hub. Step 3, place the round marker on the first space on the round track. Step 4, choose a faction and get the corresponding player board. Step 5, place the score marker for your factions on 10 on the prestige score track. Step 6, randomly choose a starting player. Step 7, place a research marker on the start location on the research track on your player boards. Step 8, get your starting workers. You are going to get the workers matching your faction color. You will get 2 to 4 workers based on the number of players. If it's a 2-player game, you'll get 4 workers. If it's a 3-player game, you will get 3 workers. And if it's a 4-player game, you will get 2 workers. Once you place your workers on your player board, you will set 2 to the side of the main game board and place the rest back in the box. Step 9, create supply pools for the genetic components. Step 10, shuffle, place, and reveal module tiles. You will shuffle the module tiles, place them face down near the reactor, and then reveal the top 6 module tiles and place them face up on the reactor spaces. Step 11, shuffle, place, and reveal perk cards. You will shuffle the perk cards, place them to the side of the main game board, and reveal the top 3 face up next to the deck. Step 12, create supply pools for food and coins. Step 13, choose a starting resource card. In reverse turn order, you will choose a starting resource card. The starting resource cards that you can use are based on the number of players. In a 2-player game, you can only use the 2+ cards. In a 3 or 4-player game, you can use the 2+ and 3+ starting resource cards. And then finally, step 14. Take the resources shown on your starting resources cards and then keep the cards in front of you. These cards will allow you to flush the reactor once per game. Now let's look at the gameplay. A game consists of 5 rounds. A round consists of 3 phases: placement phase, splicing lab phase, and feeding phase. Now let's look at each of those phases in detail. The placement phase. In turn order, players will place 1 worker on a module, perk card, worker lounge, or splicing lab. When placed, you will gain the reward immediately. It's good to keep in mind that you cannot place a worker on an occupied space unless you have gained the ability to do so. If you have gained the ability and a player gets displaced, they would go to the worker lounge and get either 1 food or 1 coin. It's also good to keep in mind that you have to have the resources to trigger the module. If you do not have the resources, then you cannot place your worker on that module. Now let's look at some of the locations and resources that will come up during this phase, starting with the genetic components. A description of the genetic components are listed on each of your player boards. You have your claws, which allow you to displace workers, your leaves, which give you food benefits, your brains, which give you prestige point benefits, and your tentacles, which give you additional resources. Next, your perk cards. Your perk cards will either give you a benefit or a location to place a worker, and then both will give you a possible in-game scoring benefit. It's good to keep in mind that you have to have at least 3 perk cards face up next to the board at all times. The command modules. This will allow you to score points based on the value of the modules occupied by the opponents. Building module tiles from the reactor. To do this, you will choose a tile from the reactor, pay the cost in the bottom left corner, gain the prestige points in the bottom right corner, place the tile on the main game board, and gain the benefit located on that space, and then finally slide any reactor tiles that were located on the left of that tile to the right. Refilling the reactor. When going to the boiler room, you will be able to refill the reactor and gain a benefit based on the attachment that you have on that worker. Also, if there are open locations that have benefits on them in the reactor, you will gain that benefit as well. After everyone has placed all of their workers, we would move into the splicing lab phase. In slot order A to C, you will place those workers out again. So if you placed a worker in splicing lab A, you would get to place that worker on another location. You are not allowed to place them back into the splicing lab. It's good to keep in mind that if you gain a new worker during this phase, you would place that worker out immediately. After everyone has placed their workers from the splicing lab, we would move into phase 3, the feeding phase. During the feeding phase, you will collect all of your workers from the main game board, and then you will pay 1 food per worker. If you do not have the food to pay for your workers, you first pay in attachments. So any of the genetic components, and if you still do not have enough to pay for your workers, you would lose 2 prestige points for each one you are short. And then rounds would continue until the start of the 3rd round. On the time track, it tells you exactly what to do at the start of the 3rd round. At the start of the 3rd round, you would deal out 3 new perk cards face up. Each player would advance 1 research on their player boards. The command hub slot B would be unlocked, and prestige points when building module tiles are doubled. Then rounds would continue until the beginning of round 5. At the beginning of round 5, you would deal 3 new perk cards face up, advance 1 research on each of your player boards, and prestige points are tripled when building module tiles. After round 5, we would go into the final scoring. Final scoring takes 4 steps. Step 1, you will gain 1 prestige point for every 3 coins in your supply. Step 2, you will gain 1 prestige point for every 2 food in your supply. Step 3, you will gain 2 prestige points for every component, either attached or not. And then finally, step 4, you will gain prestige points based on your perk cards for the end game scoring. And after all of the players have totaled their prestige points, the tiebreaker is components in their supply, either attached or not. The faction with the highest prestige point total is the most successful faction and wins Chimera Station.